Welcome back to Equity Mates. It's time for...
Book Club. Ren's reading the book, so Bryce doesn't have to.
Perfect. My favourite time of month.
So the book that we read, and by we I don't mean you, I mean we and
The Equity Mates community.
whoever's reading along with me in the Equity Mates community, was inspired by our interview with Aswath Damadoran.
Yeah.
So we decided to read his book, The Little Book of Valuation. The Little Book is it's like a series of books. There's Joel Greenblatt's book, The Little Book That Beats the Market. I highly recommend that one. But there's like 26 of them, all related to investing. Some of them get kind of esoteric is probably the generous term. But there's some good ones in there. So good little series if you want some introductions to key investing concepts. Now that's what I thought this book would be.
Okay.
It's a little book that beats them. A little book of valuation. I thought it'd be a little
Basics
gentle introduction to some key valuation concepts. Strap your hard hat on, Bryce, because yeah. Look, I mean, I think this book oscillates between like explaining very simply and clearly some very basic things, and then getting into like complex formulas. Like, for example, if you ever want to calculate the appropriate discount rate, I have all the formulas to calculate. Well, first of all, a discount rate in a discounted cash flow is made up of the risk-free rate, the equity risk premium, and then the individual stocks beta. And together we can calculate them all because you get all the formulas in this book.
Wow.
Yeah. Parts of this book, I was like...
It's a textbook.
Parts of this, I was like, this is why people hate studying finance at uni. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this can't wait for it. Sounds enthralling.
But like, if you want to invest in individual stocks and you want to value a company, you have to do it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just like... It's not as fun as trying to predict like
Just throwing darts at a dartboard.
yeah, what's going to happen next in the news, or seeing Nvidia go from bottom left to top right. So I think conceptually this book's really broken into 4 parts, like valuation concepts, then intrinsic value, and that's where a lot of the textbooky stuff is. Then relative value, and then finally how we apply these concepts. So starting with valuation concepts, like there's like why investing works, the time value of money, like some of those basic stuffs. The limitations of valuations. So 2 big ones from Aswath. All valuations are biased and most valuations are wrong. So I think it's like really tempering you to be generally right rather than specifically wrong when it comes to valuations. He goes through Accounting 101, the different financial statements. Then we get into intrinsic value, and that this is the dense part of the book, and this is all about discounted cash flows and calculating intrinsic value of a company and arriving at one number. And it's very specific. I was talking about calculating the discount rate before. For example, he steps through an example and calculates that 3M in 2008's appropriate discount rate was 9.16%. Like that's a level of great. So whenever I do a DCF, I just use 10% as my discount rate, and I never calculate the appropriate discount rate. But that's why Aswath.
Yeah. The Dean of Finance.
But even Buffett said he would use long-term treasuries as his discount rate.
Yeah.
Probably in an era where long-term treasuries weren't paying a couple of points, but yeah. So anyway, that intrinsic value section is really interesting. It's quite dense. It did put me to sleep a few nights when I was reading it before bed. So good sleep aid if you want it. But it's some of the most complex and difficult to explain investing concepts explained well. Like he, as we heard in the interview, he's good at explaining this stuff. This stuff just is naturally dense and mathematical. Then we get to relative value, and that's all about comparing ratios. That's a lot more simple, and conceptually, it's easier to read. Yeah. Some really interesting stuff in there though, and some stuff that I hadn't really thought about. So how's this one that I pulled out and I wanted to bring? When you're looking at a ratio, You need to make sure that the numerator and denominator are defined consistently. If the numerator is an equity value, then the denominator should be an equity value as well. If the numerator is a firm value or an operating value, then the denominator should be as well. And there are some ratios, some that are pretty common, which don't pass that test. So some that do, price to equity. Both are looking at the equity value of the company. EBITDA to enterprise value are both looking at the operating assets of the company. So those both work as ratios. But here's a really common one that does not meet that test. Price to sales. Because price looks at equity value, it looks at the what the company is valued at by the market, whereas sales is an operating value. It's the firm's value. Now, why is this a problem? And conceptually, if none of this made sense, this is the important bit. You have two companies. They have the same amount of sales, but very different levels of debt. That if you just looked at price to sales and they were at a similar price, the ratios would be similar, but they shouldn't be because one company is more valuable than the other. You should be using enterprise value to sales because they're both firm operating values and they factor in that debt. Or you use price to earnings because earnings factors in the cost of debt. Like you're paying interest on debt. Make sense?
Yeah, conceptually.
So anyway, like there was really interesting stuff like that around both the intrinsic value stuff we spoke about, but then also relative value. So I think however you want to value companies, there's some good stuff in there. So then after it goes through it all conceptually, then it just goes deep on applying these concepts. How to value mature companies, how to value growth. These are all different chapters. How to value growth companies, how to value declining companies, a chapter on financial companies, a chapter on cyclical and commodity companies, a chapter on companies with intangible assets. You get the point. Every company.
Far out.
But look, my overall takeaway from this book is this is a book about getting a good valuation rather than getting a good investment. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Like, if you read this book hoping to find the secret to finding great investments and great ideas, this isn't the book for you.
But you'll get to a good number.
This is a book for how you value anything.
Yeah.
And how you do it well.
Yeah.
And conceptually why we do it in a
that?
certain way. No, but like, it's almost just a given for him. Like, he's the dean of valuation. He's not the dean of good investment ideas.
But I mean, does he then apply it to... Because he's not just going out and buying everything that comes...
cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. But like part of... And that, that's when he's talking about the growth companies and stuff. Like, you have to forecast into the future to get...
True.
Like,
so it's implicit in the number.
Yeah, like a valuation is only as good as the numbers in that valuation. And the numbers in that valuation are only as good as the work you do to forecast what comes next.
Yeah.
Forecasting is incredibly hard.
Yeah.
But, he goes through examples, 3M, Google, Under Armour, Toyota. Like, there's a lot of worked examples throughout the book. But, yeah, it is a book about valuation as opposed to a book about investing. If that slight distinction makes sense.
Yeah, it feels more like a textbook than a...
Oh, no. Like, he's written textbooks. They would be a level denser than this.
True.
Like, I don't want to... Put it this way. It is probably one of the most accessible books on intrinsic valuation that I've read.
Okay.
Not that I've read a heap, but I've read a few. I've read more than the average person, I would say. Now, look, let me leave you with Aswath's 10 Rules for the Road, which is how he leaves his book. And whether or not you want to read this book, some good stuff about, I guess, like how he uses valuation in his life.
Okay.
1, feel free to abandon models, but do not budge on first principles. Pay heed to markets, but do not let them determine what you do. Risk affects value. Growth is not free and is not always good for value. All good things, including growth, come to an end. Nothing is forever. Watch out for truncation risks. Many firms do not make it. Look at the past, but think about the future. Remember the law of large numbers. An average is better than a single number. Accept uncertainty, face up to it and deal with it. And finally, and I think this is probably most important for our style of investing, convert stories to numbers.
Yeah, he was big on that in the interview. Yeah. Every number has a story.
And every story has a number.
Yeah, same thing.
All right, so for the next month, the book I'm going to read, it's called Unscripted, The Epic Battle for a Media Empire. The quote is the real life Succession. So
Oh, nice.
yeah,
Epic.
there you go.
All right. Well, I'm going to watch Succession.
Bit more excitement than Aswath's valuation book.
Nice.
No offense to Aswath.
No offense. Well, if you have a book that you'd like to add to the list as well for our monthly book club, hit us up at equitymates.com/contact. But otherwise, Ren, we'll leave it there and pick it up next episode.